The letter crumpled in Clara's frozen fingers as the station master's words cut through the howling wind. "Ma'am, that man says he never sent for you." Every soul on that snow-covered platform turned to stare at her, the mail-order bribe nobody wanted. Silas Beckett stood 20 feet away, his jaw set like granite, saying nothing. Then a 9-year-old girl broke from the crowd, tears freezing on her cheeks, and threw herself at Clara's feet. "I wrote it. I chose you. Please, Mama sent you to us. I know she did." If you want to witness how one desperate letter, written by a child's trembling hand, can rewrite the fate of an entire family, stay until the very end and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The westbound train groaned to a halt at Bitter Creek Station, Wyoming Territory, releasing a cloud of steam into the December air that hung so cold it could crack bones. Clara Josephine Whitmore gripped the worn handle of her valise and stepped onto the platform, her breath turning to ice crystals the moment it left her lips. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of rattling coaches, sleepless nights, and the relentless clatter of wheels against iron rails. 3 weeks of clutching a letter that promised her everything she'd stopped believing in. A home, a family, a place where someone actually wanted her. She'd memorized every word. "Dear Miss Whitmore, I am a rancher of modest means but honest work. I have 2 children who need a mother's care, and I need a partner who can withstand Wyoming winters and Wyoming solitude. If you are willing to build something real from hard ground, I would welcome you as my wife. Respectfully, Silas Nathaniel Beckett." The handwriting had been careful, almost childlike in its precision. Clara had thought it charming, the penmanship of a working man more comfortable with reins than pens. She'd been wrong about so many things. "Miss Whitmore?" The station master, a thin man with frost in his mustache, approached her with the kind of pity usually reserved for orphaned calves. "You are Miss Whitmore, aren't you? The mail-order bride?" Clara straightened her spine. 31 years of disappointment had taught her how to stand tall when the world wanted her small. "I am. Is Mr. Beckett here to meet me?" The station master's eyes slid sideways toward a group gathered near the ticket office. Clara followed his gaze and saw them, a wall of bodies wrapped in wool and judgment, their breath forming a collective cloud of disapproval. And at the front of that wall stood a man who could only be Silas Beckett. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered in the way of men who'd spent their lives lifting, hauling, carrying the weight of survival. His hat sat low, shadowing eyes she couldn't read, but his jaw was set in a line that spoke louder than any words. He didn't move toward her. He didn't smile. He didn't do anything except stand there like a man facing an execution he hadn't ordered. Clara walked toward him, her boots crunching through snow that came up past her ankles. The cold bit through her traveling dress, through the 2 petticoats she'd layered for warmth, through the hope she'd been foolish enough to carry. "Mr. Beckett?" She stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to see the lines exhaustion had carved around his eyes. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I believe you sent for me." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Or guilt. It was gone before she could name it. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, rough, like gravel under wagon wheels. "I don't know how to say this proper, but there's been a mistake." The word hit her like a physical blow. "A mistake?" "I didn't write that letter." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I didn't send for you. I don't know who did, but it wasn't me." The crowd pressed closer. Clara could feel their eyes on her, drinking in her humiliation like it was spring water after drought. "But the letter!" She reached into her pocket with fingers that had gone numb, pulled out the creased paper she'd read 100 times. "It has your name, your address. It describes your ranch, your children, your wife who passed." Silas's face went white at the mention of his wife. "I didn't write it," he repeated, and this time his voice cracked on the edges. "I'm sorry you came all this way, but I can't. I don't need a wife. I don't want one." A woman pushed forward from the crowd, silver-haired and sharp-featured, wrapped in a coat that cost more than Clara had earned in 2 years of teaching. "Well," the woman's voice carried the satisfied tone of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed. "Another one of those mail-order situations. I told you, Silas. I told everyone. These women come west looking for easy lives, and they bring nothing but shame." "Mrs. Harwood," Silas's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time." "It's precisely the time." Prudence Harwood turned to the crowd, playing to her audience. "This woman has traveled here under false pretenses, expecting to trap a grieving widower into marriage. How do we know she didn't write those letters herself? How do we know this isn't some elaborate scheme?" Clara's cheeks burned despite the cold. "I wrote nothing but responses to a letter I received." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "A letter that bore Mr. Beckett's name and details only he would know. If there's been deception, ma'am, I'm not the one who committed it." "Convenient story." "It's the truth." Prudence Harwood smiled, the kind of smile that had no warmth in it. "The truth is, you're a woman of 30, unmarried, with no family and no prospects, who answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride. The truth is, you came here hoping to secure a man who never wanted you. The truth is, you don't belong here, Miss Whitmore, and the kindest thing would be for you to get back on that train before you embarrass yourself further." The words landed exactly where they were meant to, in the soft places Clara had spent years trying to protect. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, to do something besides stand here being flayed alive by a stranger's tongue. But before she could speak, a child's voice cut through the crowd like a blade through butter. "Stop it! Stop being mean to her!" Everyone turned. A girl pushed through the wall of bodies, small and fierce, her dark hair escaping from a braid that had been hastily done, her coat too thin for the weather, her boots patched in 3 places. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, but she moved with the determination of someone twice her age. She stopped directly in front of Clara and planted herself there like a flag claiming territory. "She's not lying," the girl said, her voice shaking but loud. "She's not a schemer or whatever you called her. I know because I'm the one who wrote that letter." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop, holding its breath for what would come next. Silas's face went from white to gray. "Emmeline," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "What did you just say?" The girl, Emmeline, didn't look at her father. She kept her eyes fixed on Clara, and in those eyes, Clara saw something she recognized. Desperation. The kind that comes from carrying weight too heavy for young shoulders. "I wrote it, Pa. I wrote the letter. I found the advertisement in the catalog, and I copied your handwriting from the old letters in Mama's trunk. And I sent it, because we need her." Emmeline's voice cracked, but she didn't cry. "We need someone, Pa. You work yourself half to death, and you barely sleep, and you never smile. And Eli's been sick twice this month, and I don't know how to make him better. And I can't do it all by myself anymore." The crowd had gone completely still, their judgment suspended in the face of a child's confession. Clara looked at the girl, really looked at her, and saw beyond the defiant stance and the 2 old eyes. She saw exhaustion. She saw fear. She saw a 9-year-old who'd been playing mother since before she should have known the word. "Emmeline," Silas's voice was strangled. "We'll talk about this at home." "We won't." Emmeline's chin jutted up. "Because you don't talk about anything at home. You just work and pretend everything's fine, and it's not fine, Pa. Nothing's been fine since Mama died." A smaller figure emerged from the crowd then. A boy of 4 or 5, clutching a stuffed horse that had seen better days. He went straight to Emmeline and wrapped his arms around her leg, staring up at Clara with wide brown eyes. "Emmy," he said, his voice small and scared, "why is everybody yelling?" Emmeline's fierce expression cracked. She put her hand on her brother's head, protective, automatic. "It's okay, Eli. It's gonna be okay." But she didn't sound like she believed it. Clara looked at the two of them, the girl who'd committed forgery out of desperation, and the boy who didn't understand why the world was so angry, and something shifted in her chest. She'd come here expecting a husband. She'd found something else entirely. "Mrs. Harwood," Clara said, turning to face the older woman, "I believe you suggested I get back on that train." Prudence's smile returned, triumphant. "A wise decision, under the circumstances. Except I didn't say I was leaving." Clara squared her shoulders. "I came here because a letter promised me a home." That letter may have been written by a child, but the need that drove it was real. These children need help. Their father needs help. And I didn't travel 3 weeks through winter just to turn around because some people find my presence inconvenient. Prudence's smile vanished. "You can't mean to stay." "I mean to discuss the situation with Mr. Beckett, privately, like reasonable adults. After that, whatever happens is between us and no one else." Clara held the woman's gaze without flinching. "Unless the town of Bitter Creek has laws against conversations I'm not aware of?" Someone in the crowd made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly stifled. Prudence Harwood's face went red, then pale, then settled into something cold and dangerous. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Both of you." She turned and swept away, her supporters following like ducklings after their mother. In the silence that followed, Silas Beckett finally moved. He approached Clara with the wariness of a man approaching a wildfire, something that might destroy everything if handled wrong. "Miss Whitmore," his voice was hoarse, "I apologize for what just happened. For all of it. You didn't deserve to be treated that way." "No," Clara agreed. "I didn't." He flinched, but nodded. "There's a boarding house at the edge of town. Mrs. Chen runs it. It's respectable, warm, and she doesn't listen to gossip. I'll pay for your room until we can figure out what to do next." Clara looked at him, then at the children still clinging to each other in the snow. "And them? What happens to them while we figure things out?" Silas's jaw worked. "They'll come home with me, same as always." "Same as always," Clara repeated. "You mean the same as always that drove your daughter to forge letters out of desperation? That same as always?" His eyes finally met hers, and in them she saw something unexpected. Not anger at her words, but recognition. Agreement. The terrible awareness of a man who knew he was failing, but didn't know how to stop. "Pa." Emmeline's voice was small now, all the fight drained out of her. "Are you going to send her away?" Silas looked at his daughter, at the fear in her face, at the hope she was trying so hard not to show. Then he looked at Clara. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't know what I'm going to do." The station master cleared his throat awkwardly. "Folks, the next eastbound doesn't come through until Thursday. That's 5 days, weather permitting. If the lady's staying that long anyway—" He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the frozen air. 5 days. 5 days in a town that had already decided to hate her. 5 days with a man who didn't want her, and children who desperately did. Clara thought about the eastbound train, about the life waiting for her back there, which was no life at all, really. Teaching other people's children for wages that barely covered rent. Eating alone. Sleeping alone. Growing old in a room where no one would notice if she stopped breathing. She thought about her mother, dead at 40 from exhaustion and a broken heart. About her father's new wife, who'd looked at Clara like she was a stain that needed scrubbing out. About the fiancé who died before he could make her someone's wife, someone's family, someone who mattered. 31 years of being nobody to everybody. And here were two children who'd risked everything just to have someone show up. "Mr. Beckett," Clara said carefully, "I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. But I have skills. I can teach, I can cook, I can manage a household. And your children need help that you clearly can't provide alone." "I know that," he said roughly. "You think I don't know that?" "Then let me help. Not as a wife, not as anything except someone willing to work. Pay me fair wages if you want, or don't pay me at all. But don't send me away just because admitting you need help feels like failure." Silas stared at her for a long moment. "You don't know anything about me," he said finally. "About this place. About what you'd be walking into." "Then tell me." "Why?" The word came out harsh, almost angry. "Why would you want to stay somewhere you're clearly not welcome? Why would you fight for people you don't even know?" Clara looked at Emmeline, who was watching her with desperate, fearful hope. At Eli, who'd stopped being scared and was now studying her with open curiosity. At Silas, who was so tired he could barely stand up straight. "Because I know what it's like to need someone who never comes," she said quietly. "And I know what it's like to watch a child try to fill gaps that should never be their responsibility. Your daughter wrote that letter because she's been carrying your family on her shoulders, Mr. Beckett. She's 9 years old. She shouldn't have to do that." Something broke in Silas's expression. Not completely, not all the way. But a crack appeared in that stone facade, and through it, Clara glimpsed the grief he'd been holding back with both hands. "Rachel," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "My wife. She died 4 years ago. Childbirth." He looked at Eli, who was too young to remember any of it. "Emmy was 5. She had to grow up overnight because I couldn't. I didn't know how to—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I've been trying, every day. I've been trying to keep them fed and warm and safe. But trying isn't the same as succeeding, is it?" "No," Clara said gently. "It's not. But trying is where it starts." Emmeline tugged on her father's coat. "Pa," she said softly, "I know you're mad at me for lying. I know I did wrong. But she came. She actually came. And she didn't run away when Mrs. Harwood was mean. She stayed and she fought." The girl's eyes filled with tears she was trying desperately not to shed. "Mama would have liked her. I know she would." Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted. "1 week," he said to Clara. "Trial period. You stay at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Come out to the ranch during the day. See what you're getting into. At the end of the week, we both decide if this is something that can work." He paused. "If it's not, I'll pay for your ticket back east. No hard feelings. Fair?" Clara extended her hand. "Fair." He looked at her hand for a moment, as if the gesture itself was something foreign. Then he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, calloused, careful. The handshake of a man who'd learned to measure his own strength. "Pa." Emmeline's voice was almost a whisper. "Does this mean she's staying?" "For now," Silas said. We'll see what happens. Eli tugged on Clara's skirt. Miss? He looked up at her with those big brown eyes. Are you going to make dinner? I'm hungry, and Emmy burns everything. I do not burn everything, Emmeline protested, but there was no heat in it. She was too busy watching Clara, waiting for her response. Clara knelt down in the snow, bringing herself to eye level with the little boy. What's your favorite food, Eli? Biscuits, with honey. Then I'll make biscuits with honey. How does that sound? The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. Good, he said. That sounds real good. Clara stood, brushing snow from her skirt, and found Silas watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The wagon's this way, he said, his voice still rough, but somehow less guarded than before. It's a long ride to the ranch. Hope you don't mind the cold. I've survived worse than cold, Mr. Beckett. Silas, he said, surprising both of them. If you're going to be spending time with my children, you might as well use my name. Then you should call me Clara. He nodded once, short and sharp, like he was agreeing to something much bigger than names. As they walked toward the wagon, Emmeline fell into step beside Clara. The girl was quiet for a moment, then spoke without looking at her. I'm sorry I tricked you. I know it was wrong. I just thought, if I wrote a really good letter, maybe someone would actually come. Someone who'd want to stay. Clara thought about all the carefully chosen words in that letter. The details about the ranch, the children, the promise of building something real. A 9-year-old had written that. A 9-year-old who'd been carrying her family's weight since before she was old enough to understand why. Emmeline, Clara said carefully, what you did, using your father's name, deceiving someone into traveling across the country, that was wrong. You understand that, don't you? The girl's shoulders hunched. Yes, ma'am. But wanting help, wanting someone to share the load, wanting your father to have a partner, and yourself to have someone who takes care of you instead of the other way around? That part wasn't wrong. That part was brave. Emmeline looked up at her, eyes wide. Really? Really. Sometimes we just have to be brave in ways that don't involve lying. The girl was quiet for a long moment. Miss Clara? Her voice was almost too soft to hear. My mama, before she died, she made me promise to take care of Pa and the baby. She said she was counting on me. She said I was strong enough. Emmeline's voice cracked. I've been trying to keep that promise for 4 years, but I don't think I'm strong enough anymore. Clara stopped walking, knelt down again, right there in the snow, so she could look Emmeline in the eyes. Your mama shouldn't have asked that of you, she said softly. That was too much weight for a little girl to carry. She loved you, I'm sure of that. But she was scared and dying, and she made a mistake. You've been holding a promise that was never fair to begin with. Tears spilled down Emmeline's cheeks. But if I stop trying, who's going to take care of them? Me, Clara said simply. At least for now. And maybe, if things work out, for longer than that. But either way, Emmeline, you don't have to be your mother anymore. You're allowed to just be a little girl. Emmeline threw herself into Clara's arms, sobbing into her shoulder. 4 years of exhaustion and grief pouring out in great, racking waves. Clara held her tight, rocking slightly, murmuring nonsense words of comfort. Over the girl's head, she saw Silas watching them. His face was unreadable, but his hands were shaking, and there was something bright and painful in his eyes. He turned away before she could identify it. But Clara had seen enough. This man wasn't cold. He wasn't unfeeling. He was drowning in the same grief his daughter was, and he'd been treading water so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand on solid ground. The wagon ride to the Beckett Ranch took nearly an hour, moving slow through snow that had drifted deep across the road. Eli fell asleep against Clara's side almost immediately, his small body warm and trusting. Emmeline sat between Clara and her father, quieter now that she'd cried herself out. But she kept sneaking glances at Clara, as if making sure she was still there. Silas drove in silence, his attention fixed on the horses and the road ahead. When the ranch finally appeared through the swirling snow, Clara's heart sank. The house was small, barely more than a cabin, with a porch that sagged on one side and windows that had been boarded against the cold. The barn leaned slightly to the left. The corral fences looked one strong wind away from collapse. This was not the modest prosperity she'd imagined from the letter. This was survival, bare-boned and desperate. Silas must have seen her expression, because he pulled the wagon to a stop, but didn't move to get down. "It wasn't always like this," he said quietly. "When Rachel was alive, we were building something good. Had plans to expand the house, improve the barn. But after she passed," he trailed off. "Keeping the children fed and warm took everything I had. The rest just stopped." Clara looked at the sagging porch, the boarded windows, the general air of exhaustion that hung over the whole place. "It's still standing," she said finally. "That's more than some can say." Silas let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "That's one way to look at it." They climbed down from the wagon, Silas lifting the sleeping Eli easily, while Emmeline helped Clara with her valise. The snow was falling harder now, coating everything in white, and the wind had picked up with a bitter edge. Inside, the house was cold, the fire in the hearth having burned down to embers. Emmeline immediately went to add wood, her movements practiced and efficient. Clara looked around, taking in the single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space. A doorway led to what she assumed were bedrooms in the back. Everything was clean but sparse, furniture worn, shelves bare, walls empty of decoration. And everywhere she saw absence. The kind of absence that spoke of things removed, of memories too painful to keep in sight. Rachel's ghost lived in this house, not haunting it, but missing from it. "I'll take Miss Clara's things to the spare room," Emmeline said, already moving. "And I'll start some soup. Eli needs to eat when he wakes up." She was doing it again, taking charge, being the mother. "Emmeline," Clara's voice was gentle but firm, "show me where the kitchen is. I'll start the soup." The girl stopped, confused. "But I always—" "I know, but tonight I'm going to do it. And you're going to sit by the fire and get warm." Emmeline looked at her father, as if asking permission for something she'd never been allowed before. Silas nodded slowly. "Do what Miss Clara says, Emmy. You've done enough today." The girl's face crumpled, but this time it wasn't grief. It was relief, overwhelming and unexpected. She sat, and Clara went to make soup. Hours later, after Eli had been fed and bathed and tucked into bed, after Emmeline had fallen asleep in the rocking chair by the fire and been carried to her room by her father, Clara and Silas sat at the kitchen table in the dim lamplight. "Mrs. Chen's boarding house," Silas said. "I should take you there now. It's getting late, but the roads are still passable." "Or," Clara said carefully, "I could sleep in the spare room tonight. It's late, it's cold, and your children have already had enough upheaval for one day." Silas's jaw tightened. People will talk. People are already talking. They decided what I was the moment I stepped off that train. Whether I sleep here or at the boarding house tonight isn't going to change their minds. She held his gaze. "I'm suggesting practicality, Mr. Beckett, nothing more." He was quiet for a long moment. "Silas," he corrected finally. You said you'd call me Silas. Silas, then. He nodded, rubbing his eyes with one hand. Fine. One night. Tomorrow I'll take you to Mrs. Chen's, and we'll start this trial period properly. Fair enough. Clara stood to clear the dishes, but Silas's voice stopped her. Miss Clara. He was staring at the table, not at her. What my daughter did, the lying, the forgery. I'll make sure there are consequences. She needs to understand she can't just... You don't have to worry about her. I'm not worried about her. Clara sat back down. I'm worried about both of you. Emmeline didn't write that letter because she's deceitful. She wrote it because she's been drowning in responsibility that should never have been hers, and no one threw her a rope. Silas flinched. I tried. I've been trying since Rachel. I know, but trying alone doesn't work. Sometimes we need help, and asking for it isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Clara paused. Your daughter was wise enough to ask. Maybe you can learn from her. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw past the exhaustion and the grief to the man underneath. He was still young, really. Younger than she was, maybe. But life had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone softer, maybe. Someone who'd have gotten back on that train. Do you wish I had? The question hung between them. No, Silas said finally. No, I don't think I do. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, was barely even an admission. But it was a start. Clara stood again, and this time he let her clear the dishes. Get some sleep, Silas, she said over her shoulder. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He didn't answer, but when she glanced back, she saw him sitting at the table with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with something that might have been grief, or might have been relief. Maybe both. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the wounded ranch in white, covering the broken places, softening the sharp edges. And somewhere in the darkness, a little girl slept peacefully for the first time in 4 years, dreaming of a woman who hadn't run away, who'd stood her ground, who'd promised that she wouldn't have to carry the weight alone anymore. Tomorrow would bring questions and complications and the judgment of a town that had already made up its mind. But tonight, in this small, broken house, something had shifted. Something had begun. Dawn came gray and reluctant, filtering through the gaps in the boarded windows with all the warmth of a stranger's handshake. Clara woke to the sound of small feet padding across wooden floors and the muffled clatter of someone trying to be quiet in a kitchen that wasn't built for stealth. She dressed quickly in the cold room, her breath visible in the air, and found Emmeline already at the stove, standing on a wooden crate to reach the cookpot. I was going to make porridge, the girl said without turning around, before you woke up, so you wouldn't have to. Clara crossed the kitchen and gently took the wooden spoon from Emmeline's hand. What did we talk about last night? Emmeline's shoulders hunched. That I don't have to do everything anymore. And yet here you are, at dawn, doing everything. It's habit. The girl finally turned, and Clara saw the dark circles under her eyes, the tension that never quite left her small frame. I've been doing this since I was 5. I don't know how to stop. Clara knelt down, bringing herself to eye level. Then we'll learn together. Stopping is a skill, just like starting, but you have to let yourself practice it. She smoothed a strand of hair from Emmeline's face. Now, where does your father keep the coffee? 3rd shelf. Mama used to say he was useless without it. Clara found the coffee tin and set water to boil. Behind her, she heard Emmeline settle into a chair, the unfamiliar act of sitting still making the wood creak with her restlessness. Miss Clara? What happens if the trial period doesn't work? What happens if Pa decides he doesn't want you to stay? Clara measured coffee grounds carefully, buying time. Then I'll go back east, I suppose. Find another teaching position. Start over, somewhere new. Would you be sad if you had to leave? The question was so small, so loaded with fear, that Clara had to close her eyes against the weight of it. Yes, she said honestly. I would be very sad. Good. Emmeline's voice was fierce. Because I'd be sad too. And Eli would cry for days. And Pa, he doesn't know it yet, but he'd be sad most of all. You think so? I know so. He just doesn't know how to show things. Mommy used to say his heart was a locked box, and she was the only one with the key. But she took the key with her when she died, and now he can't open it for anyone. Clara turned to look at the girl, struck by the wisdom wrapped in those childish words. Maybe he just needs a new key, she said softly. Maybe. Emmeline studied her with those two old eyes. Maybe you could be it. Before Clara could respond, the bedroom door opened and Silas emerged, still pulling on his coat, his hair uncombed and his jaw shadowed with stubble. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes moving from Clara at the stove to Emmeline sitting quietly at the table. Emmy, he said slowly, you're not cooking. Miss Clara told me to sit. And you listened? She's very convincing. Something flickered across Silas's face, too quick to read. And then he was moving toward the coffee pot with the single-minded focus of a man who'd learned to function on too little sleep. I'll take you to Mrs. Chen's after breakfast, he said to Clara, without looking at her. Get the trial period started properly. All right. And I'll need to talk to Emmeline about consequences. What she did, the lying, it can't go unaddressed. I understand. Silas finally met her eyes then, and Clara saw the struggle in his face. The father wanting to discipline his child, warring with the man who understood why she'd done it. She's not a bad girl, he said quietly. She's just been carrying too much for too long. I know. Do you? His voice cracked slightly. Because I didn't. I didn't see it until yesterday, until I watched her stand on that platform and confess to the whole town what she'd done. My daughter forged letters because she was desperate, and I was too blind to notice. You weren't blind, you were drowning. That's not an excuse. No, Clara agreed, but it's an explanation. And explanations matter, because they help us understand how to do better. Eli appeared in the doorway then, rubbing his eyes with one fist and clutching his stuffed horse with the other. I'm hungry, he announced. Is there biscuits? Clara smiled despite herself. Not yet, but there will be porridge soon. I don't like porridge. Have you tried my porridge? The boy considered this seriously. No. Then how do you know you don't like it? Eli's face scrunched in confusion at this logic, and Emmeline laughed, a real laugh, surprising in its lightness. Silas watched his children with something like wonder in his eyes, as if he'd forgotten what the sound of genuine happiness was. After breakfast, Silas drove Clara into town through snow that had softened overnight into a heavy, wet blanket covering everything in white. The horses moved slowly, carefully, and Silas kept his attention on the road. Clara sat beside him in silence, acutely aware of the distance he maintained between them, the careful way he held himself apart. Mrs. Chen, he said finally, she's not like the others. Came here from China years ago. Lost her husband in a mining accident. She knows what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. You're warning me that she's the exception, not the rule. I'm telling you she'll be fair. Everyone else. He didn't finish the sentence. Everyone else has already decided what I am. Yes. Clara watched the town appear through the falling snow, a collection of wooden buildings huddled together against the cold. "What do you think I am, Silas?" The question surprised him. She could tell by the way his hands tightened on the reins. "I don't know yet," he said slowly. "I know you came here expecting one thing and found another. I know you didn't run when most people would have. I know my daughter trusts you, and Emmy doesn't trust anyone. But I've been wrong about people before, and my children have already lost too much for me to make another mistake." It was honest. Brutal, maybe, but honest. Clara could work with honest. Mrs. Chen's boarding house sat at the edge of town, a two-story building that had been painted white once, but had faded to gray under years of Wyoming weather. The porch was swept clean of snow, and smoke curled from the chimney in a way that promised warmth. A small woman emerged as they pulled up, her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Mr. Beckett." Her voice carried the faint melody of an accent, softened by years of English. "And this would be the mail-order bride causing all the trouble." "This is Miss Clara Whitmore," Silas said carefully. "She needs a room. Quiet, respectable, fair terms." "Fair terms meaning what?" "Meaning she's working for me at the ranch, teaching my children, managing the house." Silas's jaw tightened. "It's a business arrangement, nothing improper." Mrs. Chen's eyes moved from Silas to Clara with an intensity that felt like being weighed on a scale. "Business arrangement," she repeated. "And what does Miss Whitmore say about this business arrangement?" Clara stepped forward. "I say that I came here because a letter promised me a chance at something real. The letter was written by a 9-year-old girl who was desperate for help. I'm staying because that desperation deserves an answer, and because I'm tired of running from places that don't want me." Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. "Rooms $5 a week, breakfast and supper included. No men in rooms, no exceptions." She paused. "And no listening to gossip. This town talks plenty, but most of it's air and emptiness. I can handle talk." "Good, you'll need to." Mrs. Chen turned to Silas. "Bring her things. 3rd room on the left, upstairs. And Mr. Beckett, whatever trouble's coming from this, and trouble is coming, don't bring it to my doorstep." She disappeared inside without waiting for a response. Silas helped Clara down from the wagon, his hands careful and impersonal. "I'll come for you tomorrow," he said. "First light. The children will be expecting you." "I'll be ready." He nodded once, sharp and final, then climbed back onto the wagon and drove away without looking back. Clara stood in the snow, watching him go, feeling the weight of what she'd chosen settling onto her shoulders. Then she picked up her valise and walked inside. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. Clara unpacked slowly, hanging her 3 dresses in the cramped wardrobe, placing her mother's cameo on the washstand where she could see it. The cameo had been the only thing of value her mother had owned, passed down from grandmother to daughter. Clara had carried it across the country, a talisman against loneliness. She touched it now, feeling the cool ivory under her fingers. "Well, Mama," she said softly, "I've done it now. Found myself in the middle of nowhere, with a man who doesn't want me, and children who do, and a whole town ready to run me out on a rail." The cameo offered no advice. "I know. One day at a time, one foot in front of the other." Clara smiled sadly. "You always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Guess you were right." A knock at the door made her turn. Mrs. Chen stood in the hallway, holding a cup of tea, her expression unreadable. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing over the cup. "First night in the new place is always the hardest." Clara took the tea gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around its warmth. "Thank you." Mrs. Chen didn't leave. Instead, She leaned against the doorframe, studying Clara with those sharp eyes. "The Beckett family," she said slowly. "They've had a hard road. Silas was different before his wife died. Smiled more, talked more, was part of this community instead of hiding from it. And now? Now he's a ghost, living in his own house. Does his work, sells his cattle, buys his supplies, never stays in town longer than he has to, never looks anyone in the eye." Mrs. Chen paused. His wife's death broke something in him, something that hasn't healed. And the children? The boy's too young to remember much, but the girl, Emmy, she remembers everything. Remembers her mother dying, remembers her father disappearing into grief. She's been holding that family together with her bare hands since she was 5 years old. Clara thought of Emmeline's face on the train platform, fierce and frightened and determined. Someone should have helped them sooner. People tried. Mrs. Harwood organized meals. Church ladies came by with clothes for the children. Folks offered to take the kids on Sundays so Silas could rest. Mrs. Chen shook her head. He refused all of it, said he didn't need charity, said he could manage on his own. Pride. Or shame. Sometimes they look the same from the outside. Mrs. Chen straightened. "I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you're walking into. Silas Beckett isn't going to make this easy. He's going to push you away, test you, give you reasons to leave. Not because he wants you gone, but because he's terrified of what happens if he lets you stay." What happens? He might have to feel something again. And feeling, for a man who spent 4 years making himself numb, is the scariest thing in the world. Clara looked down at her tea, watching the steam curl upward and disappear. "I'm not afraid of hard things, Mrs. Chen. I can see that. Just make sure you're not so focused on being strong that you forget to protect yourself." The older woman moved toward the door. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She left, and Clara sat alone in the small room, listening to the sounds of the town settling into evening. Outside her window, snow continued to fall. The morning came too quickly, gray and cold, with a wind that bit through every layer of clothing Clara owned. She was dressed and waiting on Mrs. Chen's porch when Silas arrived, his wagon cutting dark tracks through the fresh snow. He didn't speak as she climbed up beside him, just clicked his tongue at the horses and pointed them toward home. They'd been traveling for 10 minutes when Clara broke the silence. "Did you talk to Emmeline?" Silas's hands tightened on the reins. "Some. About consequences? About why she did it. About how scared she's been. About the promise she made to her mother." His voice roughened. "Did you know about that? The promise?" "She told me. Her mother asked her to take care of you and Eli. Before she died." "Rachel never told me that." Silas's jaw worked. "She never told me she put that weight on Emmy's shoulders. If I'd known—" "You'd have what? Told a 5-year-old that she didn't have to keep a promise to her dying mother?" "I'd have tried to carry more of it myself." "You were carrying your own grief, Silas, and your children's, and a ranch, and a life that fell apart overnight." Clara kept her voice gentle. "You couldn't have carried more. No one could." He was quiet for a long moment. "She's not being punished," he said finally. "Emmy. I couldn't do it. Couldn't look at that girl who's been working so hard for 4 years and tell her she was wrong to want help." "Good, but she has to understand that lying isn't the answer. That if she needs something, she comes to me directly." "She will. She just needs to learn that coming to you is safe. That you won't disappear into yourself when things get hard." Silas flinched. "I know I've done that. Withdrawn. Made myself unavailable." Knowing is the first step. Is it? Because it doesn't feel like enough. It's not enough on its own, but it's where change starts. Clara turned to look at him fully. You're not a bad father, Silas. You're a grieving one. There's a difference. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, but she saw his throat move as he swallowed hard. Rachel would have liked you, he said quietly. She always said I needed someone who'd argue with me, someone who'd push back instead of letting me retreat. Is that what I'm doing? Arguing? I don't know what you're doing. He finally glanced at her, and in his eyes she saw confusion and something else, something that might have been hope struggling against fear. But whatever it is, my children are responding to it. Emmeline laughed yesterday. Genuine laughter. I haven't heard that sound in years. She's a remarkable girl. She's a girl who grew up too fast because her father couldn't figure out how to help her slow down. Then help her now. It's not too late. The ranch appeared through the trees, smoke rising from the chimney, and Clara felt something in her chest loosen slightly at the sight. Not home, not yet, but the possibility of it. Emmeline and Eli were waiting on the porch, bundled in coats and scarves, their faces bright with anticipation. "Miss Clara!" Eli launched himself off the steps before the wagon had fully stopped, plowing through snow that came up to his waist. "I've been waiting forever. Emmy said you might not come back, but I said you would because you promised biscuits." Clara climbed down and caught the boy as he barreled into her, lifting him easily despite his winter layers. "I always keep my promises," she said, "especially promises about biscuits." "With honey?" "With as much honey as your father allows." She set him down and looked up at Emmeline, who hadn't moved from the porch. The girl's expression was guarded, hopeful, afraid, all at once. "Good morning, Emmeline." "Morning, Miss Clara." A pause. "I wasn't sure you'd come back either." "Why wouldn't I?" Emmeline shrugged, but her eyes said everything. "People leave. People always leave. Why would you be any different?" Clara climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of the girl. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to remember it. Can you do that?" Emmeline nodded slowly. "I came 3,000 miles to be here. I stood on that train platform and let the whole town judge me. I'm sleeping in a boarding house and working for wages in a place where no one wants me." Clara held the girl's gaze. "I'm not doing any of that because I have nowhere else to go. I'm doing it because I chose to, because you and Eli and your father are worth choosing. Do you understand?" Emmeline's lower lip trembled. "But why? You don't even know us." "I'm learning, and everything I've learned so far tells me this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The girl stood frozen for a moment, tears gathering in her eyes. Then she threw herself at Clara, wrapping her thin arms around her waist and holding on like she'd never let go. "I want you to stay," Emmeline whispered. "Not just for the trial period. Forever. I want you to stay forever." Clara held her tight, feeling the fragile bones, the desperate grip, the 4 years of loneliness pouring out in a single embrace. "One day at a time," she said softly. "Let's start with that." The day fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Clara took over the kitchen, teaching Emmeline the difference between cooking as survival and cooking as care. Eli sat at the table practicing his letters, tongue poking out in concentration. Silas worked outside, mending fences and tending animals, but Clara noticed him passing by the window more often than necessary, glancing in at the scene inside. At midday, she brought him coffee and found him in the barn, repairing a saddle with hands that moved with practiced ease. "The children are doing well," she said, handing over the cup. I can hear them from out here, laughing." He took the coffee, but didn't drink. I'd forgotten what that sounded like. A house with laughter in it? Houses need people to make them homes. You've had a house for 4 years. Maybe it's time to have a home again. Silas looked at her with something complicated in his eyes. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's possible. There's a difference." He turned the coffee cup in his hands, and Clara saw the struggle in him, the wanting warring with the fear of wanting. "My wife," he said slowly. "She was the one who knew how to do all this. The softness, the warmth, the making things feel safe. I was always better with animals than people, better with work than words." "That's not true." "It is true. Ask anyone who knew us. Rachel was the heart. I was just the hands that kept everything running." "Hands matter too. And hearts can be learned." Clara paused. "You're gentler than you think, Silas. I've watched you with your children. The way you lifted Eli from the wagon last night. The way you looked at Emmeline when she confessed. You feel things deeply. You just don't know how to show them." "Showing them means being vulnerable. And being vulnerable means people can hurt you." "Yes, it does. But it also means people can love you." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Silas set down the coffee cup and turned back to the saddle. "I should get back to work." "Silas?" He stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm not asking you for anything," Clara said quietly. "Not love, not promises, not feelings you're not ready to give. I'm just asking you to stay open to the possibility that life can get better. That's all." He didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. Clara left him in the barn and returned to the house, where Emmeline had set the table for lunch and Eli was proudly displaying a page of wobbly letters. "Look, Miss Clara, I wrote my name. E-L-I. That's me." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You're a natural." Emmeline watched from the stove, her expression guarded. "Miss Clara, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you and Pa talking about Mama in the barn?" Clara considered how to answer. "We were talking about what it means to be part of a family, about how hard it is when someone's missing." Emmeline was quiet for a moment. "I miss her every day," she said finally. "Even though I was only 5 when she died, I remember everything. Her voice, her hands, the way she smelled like lavender and bread. I remember how she used to sing while she cooked, and how she'd let me help, even when I made messes." "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Emmeline's voice caught. "And sometimes I'm afraid that if I let myself love someone else, it means I'm forgetting her. Like there's only so much room in my heart, and if I give some to you, I have to take it away from her." Clara crossed the kitchen and knelt in front of the girl. "Love doesn't work that way, sweetheart. Hearts grow. They make room. Loving someone new doesn't mean loving someone gone any less." She took Emmeline's hands in hers. "Your mother will always be your mother. Nothing I do, nothing anyone does, can change that. But she's not here anymore, and I am. There's space for both, I promise." Emmeline's eyes filled with tears. "Pa doesn't talk about her, ever. It's like she never existed." "He talks about her to me." The girl's eyes widened. "He does?" "He told me she would have liked me, that she always said he needed someone who'd argue with him." A small, watery laugh escaped Emmeline. "That sounds like Mama. She was always telling Pa to stop being so stubborn and let people help him. See? She's still here, in the things she taught him, in the love she gave you. You don't have to hold on to her so tight that there's no room for anything else. She wouldn't want that." Emmeline wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "Miss Clara, I think I'm glad you came, even if it was because of my lie." I'm glad I came too, even if it was because of your lie." They shared a smile, tentative but real. And somewhere in that small, cold kitchen, something began to heal. That evening, after supper, Silas drove Clara back to Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The snow had stopped falling, and the sky had cleared to reveal a vast sweep of stars, more than Clara had ever seen in her life. "Beautiful," she murmured, looking up. "Rachel loved the stars," Silas said quietly. "Used to sit on the porch and name the constellations for Emmy. Made up stories about each one." He paused. "I haven't done that with the children since she died. Haven't done a lot of things." "Maybe you could start again." He didn't answer, but when he pulled the wagon to a stop outside the boarding house, he didn't immediately tell her to get down. "Miss Clara," he said, still looking at the sky, "I want you to know something. Whatever happens at the end of this week, whatever I decide, it won't be because of anything you did wrong. If I send you away, it'll be because of me, because I'm not ready. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Do you?" He finally turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the struggle, the wanting, the fear. "Because you deserve someone who can give you everything, not a broken man with 2 children and a ranch that's falling apart. Maybe I don't want everything. Maybe I just want this." Silas shook his head slowly. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Then show me. Let me see the broken parts. Let me decide for myself whether they're worth staying for." He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't respond at all. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, "Tomorrow. Come early. There's something I need to show you." "What is it?" "Something I haven't shown anyone since Rachel died. Something that might make you understand why I am the way I am." He took a breath. "And something that might make you run." Clara climbed down from the wagon and turned to face him. "I don't run, Silas. Not anymore." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "We'll see," he said, and drove away into the starlit night. Clara barely slept that night, Silas's words echoing in her mind like a stone dropped into still water. Something that might make you run. She lay in the narrow bed at Mrs. Chen's, staring at the ceiling, wondering what secret could be heavy enough to carry for 4 years, hidden from everyone. She was dressed and waiting on the porch before the sun had fully risen, her breath making small clouds in the frozen air. When Silas's wagon appeared at the end of the street, something in her chest tightened with anticipation and fear. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his jaw was set in that hard line she was beginning to recognize as his defense against feeling too much. "You came early," he said as she climbed up beside him. "You asked me to." He nodded once, then turned the horses toward the ranch without another word. They rode in silence for nearly 20 minutes before Clara spoke.
"Are you going to tell me where we're going?"
"Not the ranch, not yet." Silas kept his eyes on the road. "There's a place I need to show you first. A place I haven't been since Rachel's funeral." Clara's breath caught. "Silas, if you're not ready, you don't have to." "I do." His voice was rough. "If you're going to stay, if there's any chance of this working, you need to understand what you're walking into. All of it. Not just the broken ranch and the sad children. The rest of it, too." He turned the wagon off the main road onto a smaller path, barely visible under the snow. The horses moved carefully, picking their way through drifts that came up to their knees. After another 10 minutes, they stopped. Clara looked around, confused. There was nothing here except snow and trees and silence, until Silas pointed toward a small clearing just visible through the branches. "There," he said quietly. That's where I need to take you. They walked together through the snow, Silas leading the way, breaking a path for her to follow. When they reached the clearing, Clara understood. A small iron fence surrounded a plot of ground, barely 6 feet square. Inside the fence stood a simple wooden cross, weathered by 4 years of Wyoming seasons. Rachel Marie Beckett, beloved wife and mother, 1848 to 1874. I made the cross myself, Silas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Couldn't afford a proper headstone. Told myself I'd replace it someday, but someday never came. Clara stood beside him, feeling the weight of his grief like a physical presence. She's beautiful, she said softly. The cross, the care you put into it. It's not enough. Nothing I did for her was ever enough. Silas's hands clenched at his sides. She deserved better than this place. Better than me. Better than dying at 26 because her body couldn't handle bringing our son into the world. Silas. I was there, his voice cracked. When she died, I was holding her hand. The doctor said there was nothing he could do, that she'd lost too much blood, that I needed to prepare myself. And I just sat there, holding her hand, watching her fade away. Tears were streaming down his face now, freezing on his cheeks in the cold air. She told me to take care of the children, made me promise, made Emmy promise too. And then she looked at Eli, this tiny baby who'd never know her, and she said, "Tell him I loved him. Tell him every day." And then she was gone. Clara reached out and took his hand, feeling the tremors running through him. The day we buried her, something inside me closed up, like a door slamming shut. Silas stared at the cross, his voice hollow. I couldn't feel anything anymore. Couldn't laugh, couldn't cry, couldn't do anything except work. So that's what I did. I worked, dawn to dark, every single day. Because as long as I was moving, I didn't have to think about the fact that my wife was in the ground and my children needed things I couldn't give them. That's grief, Silas. That's survival. That's cowardice. He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes was almost unbearable. I abandoned my children, Clara. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was there in body, but gone in spirit. Emmy had to become a mother at 5 years old because her father was too broken to be a father at all. You're not broken. You're wounded. There's a difference. Is there? He laughed bitterly. Because from where I'm standing, they look exactly the same. Clara squeezed his hand tighter. Broken things can't be fixed. Wounded things can heal. You're here, aren't you? Showing me this place? Telling me these things? That's not the action of a broken man. That's the action of someone who's trying to find his way back. Silas was quiet for a long moment, staring at his wife's grave. I loved her, he said finally. More than I knew how to say. More than I ever showed her. And now she's gone. And all I have left is the memory of everything I did wrong. What about everything you did right? He looked at her, confused. You married her. You built a home with her. You gave her 2 beautiful children. You held her hand when she died, so she didn't have to leave this world alone. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. That's not nothing, Silas. That's everything. It doesn't feel like everything. Grief never does. It makes the losses feel enormous and the gifts feel small. But the gifts are still there, if you let yourself see them. Silas turned back to the grave, and Clara saw his lips moving silently. A prayer, maybe, or an apology, or simply words he'd never been able to say. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steadier. I brought you here because I wanted you to understand why I've been the way I've been, why I push people away, why I can't promise you anything, even if I want to. Even if you want to? He met her eyes. You scare me, Clara. Not because of who you are, but because of what you make me feel. When I'm around you, that door I slammed shut 4 years ago, it starts to open. And I don't know if I'm ready for what's on the other side. Clara took a step closer to him. You don't have to open it all at once. You don't have to be ready for everything. Just be ready for the next thing, the next day, the next moment. And what is the next moment? Right now, it's standing here with you, in the snow, in front of your wife's grave. It's letting you grieve without trying to fix it. It's being present for whatever you need. Silas looked at her for a long time, something shifting in his expression. Rachel would have liked you, he said again, but this time it sounded different, less like an observation and more like a blessing. I hope so, because I intend to take good care of what she left behind. They stood together in the silence, the snow falling gently around them, the cross standing witness to a love that had ended too soon, and a new connection that was just beginning. After a while, Silas reached out and touched the cross, his fingers tracing the letters of his wife's name. Goodbye, Rachel, he whispered. I'll always love you. But I think it's time I started living again. He turned and walked back toward the wagon, and Clara followed, understanding that something fundamental had changed. The ride back to the ranch felt different. The silence between them was no longer tense, but peaceful, like two people who'd weathered a storm together and come out the other side. When they arrived, Emmeline was waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry. Pa, there's a man here, from town. He says he needs to talk to you about the ranch. Silas's expression hardened. What man? He's inside. Mrs. Harwood brought him. They're waiting in the kitchen. Clara felt her stomach drop. Whatever was coming, it wasn't good. They entered the house together and found Prudence Harwood seated at the kitchen table like she owned the place, a well-dressed man beside her who carried himself with the confidence of authority. Mr. Beckett. The man stood and extended his hand. I'm Victor Crane, representing the Pacific Western Railroad Company. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have a matter of some urgency to discuss. Silas didn't take the offered hand. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. I'm not here to sell anything, Mr. Beckett. I'm here to buy. Crane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Your land, specifically. The railroad is expanding, and your property sits directly in the path of our proposed route. My property isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, and I'm authorized to offer you a very generous sum. More than this ranch is worth, frankly. Crane pulled a document from his coat. $500. Enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere with better prospects for you and your children. Clara watched Silas's face carefully, saw the flash of temptation quickly buried under something harder. I said no. Mr. Beckett, I urge you to reconsider. The railroad is coming whether you sell or not. The only question is whether you profit from it or lose everything. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Crane's pleasant facade slipped slightly. This territory is changing, Mr. Beckett. Progress waits for no man. Those who adapt will thrive. Those who resist will be left behind. Prudence Harwood spoke for the first time. Silas, be reasonable. This ranch has been struggling since Rachel died. Everyone can see it. This offer is a gift, a chance to give your children a better life than scratching at frozen dirt in the middle of nowhere. My children's lives are none of your concern, Prudence. They're everyone's concern when you're clearly unable to provide for them properly. Prudence's eyes slid to Clara with barely concealed contempt. Bringing in mail-order women to do what you should be doing yourself. It's unseemly. What's unseemly is you using my wife's death and my family's struggles to push your own agenda." Silas's voice was deadly quiet. "I don't know what Crane is paying you for this introduction, but it's not worth your soul." Prudence's face went red. "How dare you? I'm trying to help you." "No, you're trying to control me. You've been trying since Rachel died, and I've had enough of it." Crane held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Please, let's keep this civil. Mr. Beckett, I'll leave the offer with you. Take a few days to think it over. Discuss it with your," he glanced at Clara, "household. But I should mention that my superiors are not patient men. If we don't reach an agreement soon, they may pursue other avenues." "Other avenues?" "There are legal mechanisms for acquiring land necessary for public works, eminent domain, disputed claims, unpaid taxes." Crane's smile returned, sharper now. "I'm sure everything with your homestead is in perfect order, but these processes can be complicated, expensive, time-consuming." Clara stepped forward before Silas could respond. "Are you threatening this family, Mr. Crane?" "And you are?" "Clara Whitmore. I'm working for Mr. Beckett." "Ah, yes, the mail-order bride." Crane's tone dripped condescension. "I've heard about you. Quite the scandal, from what I understand." "Scandals don't interest me. Threats do." Clara held his gaze without flinching. "You've made your offer, and it's been refused." "Continuing to pressure a grieving family with veiled intimidation isn't business, Mr. Crane. It's bullying. I'm simply explaining the realities of the situation. No, you're trying to frighten people into giving up their home. And it's not going to work." Crane studied her for a long moment, his expression calculating. "You've got fire, Miss Whitmore. I'll give you that. But fire burns out eventually. And when it does, Mr. Beckett will be standing alone against forces much larger than himself. He won't be alone." "No?" Crane smiled. "We'll see." He stood, tucking the document back into his coat. "Mr. Beckett, my offer stands for 1 week. After that, I can't guarantee the same terms." He tipped his hat toward Clara. "Miss Whitmore? Mrs. Harwood." Prudence rose to follow him, but stopped at the door. "You're making a mistake, Silas. Both of you. When this all falls apart, remember that I tried to help." She swept out, and the door closed behind her with a finality that felt like a warning. In the silence that followed, Emmeline's voice came from the hallway. "Pa, are they going to take our home?" Silas's face crumpled. He crossed the room and knelt in front of his daughter, taking her small hands in his. "No, Emmy. No one's taking our home." "But that man said, he said there were ways." "There are always people who want what we have. That doesn't mean they get to take it." Silas looked up at Clara. "We're going to fight this. Together." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle into her bones. Together. That night, after the children were in bed, Silas and Clara sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee neither of them was drinking. "Crane wasn't bluffing," Silas said quietly. "The railroad's been buying up land all through the territory. Anyone who won't sell, they find ways to push out." "What kind of ways?" "Disputed claims, suddenly discovered back taxes, complaints about moral fitness for homesteading." Silas's laugh was bitter. "That last one's probably why Prudence was there, laying groundwork." Clara's blood ran cold. "Moral fitness?" "The Homestead Act has provisions. Land can be revoked if the homesteader is deemed unfit. Immoral conduct. Failure to improve the land. Things like that." Silas met her eyes. A single man with an unmarried woman living in his home. It wouldn't be hard to make accusations. "I don't live here. I stay at Mrs. Chen's." You work here, alone with me, all day." Silas shook his head. In the eyes of people like Prudence, that's enough. Clara felt the trap closing around them, elegant and inevitable. So that's their plan. If you won't sell, they'll use me to take your land anyway. It won't work. How can you be sure? Silas was quiet for a long moment. Because there's a way to stop it. A way to make sure no one can question our arrangement. Clara's heart began to beat faster. What way? Marriage. The word fell between them like a stone. If we were married, there'd be no scandal, no moral questions, no leverage for Crane or Prudence to use against us. Clara stared at him. Silas, you can't mean... I know it's not what you wanted. I know you came here hoping for something real, something based on love. And I know I can't give you that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. His voice was rough with emotion. But I can give you a home, a family, a legal standing that protects all of us. You'd marry me to save your ranch? I'd marry you to protect my children, to protect you, to give us all a fighting chance against people who want to tear us apart. Clara stood and walked to the window, her mind racing. Marriage, to a man she'd known for less than a week. A man still grieving his wife, still learning how to feel again. It was insane. It was practical. It was exactly what she'd come here for, and nothing like what she'd imagined. Clara, Silas's voice was soft behind her. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to consider a partnership, a real one, built on honesty and mutual benefit instead of pretense. And what happens after? When the railroad finds another way to pressure you? When Prudence spreads more rumors? When the children need more than a business arrangement can provide? Then we deal with it, together. He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. I know I'm not what you hoped for. I know this isn't romantic or ideal or anything close to a fairy tale. But it's real, and it's what I have to offer. Clara turned to face him. This morning, at Rachel's grave, you said I scared you, that I make you feel things you're not ready to feel. I did. And now you're proposing marriage? Something flickered in his eyes, vulnerability struggling against his natural reserve. Maybe that's why. Maybe I'm tired of being scared. Maybe I've spent so long hiding from feeling anything that I've forgotten what it's like to actually live. He took a breath. You came here because a letter promised you a chance at something real. I'm asking you to take that chance, with me, knowing all my flaws, knowing I might fail, knowing there are no guarantees. Clara looked at this man, this wounded, stubborn, frightened man who'd lost so much and was standing here offering her everything he had left. If I say yes, she said slowly, it can't just be about saving the ranch. It can't just be a business arrangement that we pretend is more. I need to know that you're willing to try, really try, to let me in, to let yourself feel, to build something that means something. I am. Are you sure? Because I won't be another ghost in this house, Silas. I won't be a wife in name only while you bury yourself in work and grief. If we do this, we do it properly. We become a family, all four of us. Silas reached out and took her hands. I can't promise to love you, he said quietly. I don't know if I have that in me anymore. But I can promise to try. To show up every day and do the work of being a husband, a father, a partner. I can promise to let you in, even when it scares me. I can promise that whatever I have left to give, I'll give it to you. Clara looked down at their joined hands. My mother used to say that love isn't a feeling. It's a choice you make every day. She looked up at him. Can you choose me, Silas? Every day? Even on the hard days? Yes. No hesitation. Can you choose me? Clara thought about the train platform, the humiliation, the judgment. Thought about Emmeline's desperate hope and Eli's innocent trust. Thought about Rachel's grave in the snow and the door Silas was finally trying to open. Yes, she said. I can choose you. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Relief and fear and something else. Something that might have been the beginning of hope. Then let's get married. Clara laughed despite herself. Just like that? Why not? We've already got more honesty between us than most couples who've known each other for years. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Unless you want me to court you properly first. I should warn you, I'm not very good at it. I don't need courting. I need partnership. Then partnership is what you'll get. They stood there in the dim kitchen, hands still joined, making promises that should have felt rushed, but somehow felt right. We should tell the children, Clara said finally. Tomorrow. Let them sleep tonight. Silas squeezed her hands. And you should get back to Mrs. Chen's. There's still a few more days of doing things properly before we don't have to anymore. Clara nodded, but neither of them moved. Silas? Thank you. For showing me Rachel's grave. For telling me the truth about what you've been carrying. Thank you for not running. I told you, I don't run anymore. He walked her to the wagon and helped her up, his hands lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. Tomorrow, he said. We'll figure everything out tomorrow. Tomorrow. She watched him standing in the snow as the wagon pulled away, his figure growing smaller in the distance, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope she'd carried on the train coming here, but something quieter, stronger. The hope of someone who'd found exactly what she was looking for, even if it came in an unexpected package. The stars were out again, thousands of them scattered across the black sky, and Clara thought about Rachel, about the story she'd made up for Emmeline, about the love she'd left behind. I'll take care of them, Clara whispered to the stars. I promise. And somewhere in the darkness, she could almost believe that Rachel heard her. The morning brought a new kind of nervousness, the kind that comes from knowing your life is about to change in ways you can't fully predict. Clara dressed carefully at Mrs. Chen's, choosing her best dress, the gray cotton that she'd pressed the night before, and pinned her hair with hands that trembled slightly. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Chen was waiting with a cup of tea and an expression that said she already knew. He proposed, the older woman said. It wasn't a question. How did you know? I've been watching people long enough to recognize when something shifts between them. You left here last night looking like a woman carrying a heavy question. You came downstairs this morning looking like a woman who found her answer. Clara sat down at the kitchen table, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. It's not romantic. It's practical. The railroad is threatening his land, and Prudence Harwood is looking for any excuse to have him declared unfit. And marriage solves both problems. It protects us, all of us. Mrs. Chen studied her with those sharp, knowing eyes. Do you love him? Clara considered the question carefully. I don't know yet. I respect him. I trust him. I believe he's a good man who's been carrying too much weight for too long. She paused. Is that enough? It's more than many marriages start with. Mrs. Chen sat down across from her. My husband and I, we didn't love each other when we married. Our families arranged it. We were strangers who learned to be partners, and then friends, and then Somewhere along the way, love grew without either of us noticing. Did you ever regret it? Never. Not once. Mrs. Chen's voice softened. Love that grows from respect and partnership has deeper roots than love that starts with passion. Passion fades. Partnership endures. Clara thought about Silas, about the way he'd stood at his wife's grave and finally let himself grieve, about the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd asked her to choose him. "I want to build something real," she said quietly. "Something that lasts." "Then build it, one day at a time, one choice at a time." Mrs. Chen stood. "Now drink your tea. You have a family to tell." The ride to the ranch felt different this morning, charged with anticipation and uncertainty. When Clara arrived, she found Silas waiting on the porch, the children nowhere in sight. "They're inside," he said, reading her question. "I wanted to talk to you first. Make sure you hadn't changed your mind." "I haven't. Have you?" "No." He came down the steps and stood before her. "But I want to do this properly. If we're going to tell the children, if we're going to do this, I need you to know something first." "What?" Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a small box, worn and weathered. "This was Rachel's," he said quietly. "Her wedding ring. I took it off her hand before we buried her, because I couldn't bear to let it go into the ground with her." Clara's breath caught. "Silas, I can't. That's Rachel's." "Rachel's gone." His voice was rough but steady. "And this ring has been sitting in a drawer for 4 years, serving no purpose except to remind me of what I lost. I think Rachel would rather it be worn by someone who's going to help raise her children than hidden away in the dark." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band, thin and delicate. "It's not fancy. We couldn't afford fancy when we got married. But it was hers, and now I'm asking if it can be yours." Clara looked at the ring, feeling the weight of what it represented. The love Silas had shared with Rachel, the life they'd built together, the grief that had consumed him for 4 years. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Giving me this, it's not just practical. It means something."
Everything about this means something. Silas met her eyes.
"I told you I'd try. This is me trying. Giving you this ring means I'm not just marrying you to save the ranch. It means I'm choosing to move forward, to build a new life instead of just preserving an old grief." Clara reached out and touched the ring, feeling the smooth gold beneath her fingertips. "Then yes," she said. "I'll wear it. And I'll honor what it represents." Something shifted in Silas's expression. Relief mixed with something deeper. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to tell the children." They found Emmeline and Eli in the kitchen, the girl helping her brother with his letters while keeping one eye on the door. The moment they walked in together, Emmeline's gaze dropped to Clara's hand, then flew to her father's face. "Pa?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What's happening?" Silas knelt down so he was eye level with both children. "Emmy, Eli, I need to tell you both something important." Eli looked up from his letters, confused by the serious tone. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble." Clara knelt beside Silas. "This is good news. At least, we hope you'll think it's good news." Emmeline's eyes were fixed on Clara's hand, on the finger where Rachel's ring now sat. "That's Mama's ring," she said, her voice trembling. "Pa, why is she wearing Mama's ring?" Silas took a deep breath. "Because I asked Miss Clara to marry me, and she said yes." The silence that followed was absolute. Eli broke it first, his face splitting into a huge grin. Does that mean Miss Clara is going to be our mama now? For real? If you'll have me, Clara said gently. I know I can never replace your real mama, but I'd like to be part of your family, if you'll let me. Eli threw himself at her, wrapping his small arms around her neck. I want you to stay forever. I want you to make biscuits every day and read me stories and never, ever leave. Clara held him tight, tears pricking her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise. But Emmeline hadn't moved. She stood frozen, her face a battlefield of emotions. Joy and grief and fear, all fighting for dominance. Emmy? Silas reached for his daughter. Talk to me. You're giving her Mama's ring. Emmeline's voice cracked. You're replacing Mama. No, Emmy, I'm not. You are. You said you'd never forget her. You said she'd always be your wife. And now you're giving her ring to someone else like she never mattered at all. The words came out in a rush, hot and angry and full of pain. Emmeline. Silas's voice was steady, despite the anguish in his eyes. Come here. No! Please. Something in his tone cut through Emmeline's anger. She allowed him to pull her close, allowed herself to be held, though her small body remained rigid. Your mama will always be my wife, Silas said softly. She will always be the mother of my children. She will always hold a piece of my heart that no one else can touch. Marrying Clara doesn't change that. Then why are you doing it? Because your mama would want me to. Silas pulled back so he could look at his daughter's face. She made me promise to take care of you and Eli. And I've been trying to do that alone, and I've been failing. Clara can help me keep that promise. She can help me be the father you deserve. But what about loving Mama? If you love Clara, does that mean you don't love Mama anymore? Clara spoke before Silas could answer. Emmeline, can I tell you something? The girl turned to her, suspicion and hope warring in her expression. My mother died when I was 16, Clara said quietly. And for years I thought that loving anyone else meant betraying her. I thought my heart only had room for one person at a time, and if I let someone new in, she'd have to leave. What happened? I realized I was wrong. Love doesn't work that way. Your heart isn't a house with limited rooms. It's more like the sky, endless, always room for more stars. Clara reached out and touched Emmeline's cheek. Loving me won't push your mama out. She'll always be there, shining. I'll just be another star in a different part of the sky. Emmeline's lower lip trembled. I miss her so much sometimes, and I'm scared that if I love you, I'll forget what she felt like. You won't forget, I promise. Clara pulled the girl into her arms. And you can talk about her whenever you want. Tell me stories about her. Show me the things she loved. She's part of this family, Emmeline. She always will be. Emmeline broke then, sobbing into Clara's shoulder. 4 years of grief and loneliness and fear pouring out in great, racking waves. Silas watched them, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. And when Eli tugged at his sleeve, asking why Emmy was crying, he lifted the boy into his arms and held him close. Because sometimes, Silas said softly, crying is how our hearts make room for new happiness. They stayed like that for a long time, the four of them, holding each other in the small kitchen, while the fire crackled and the winter wind howled outside. When Emmeline finally pulled back, her face was red and swollen, but something in her eyes had changed. The guardedness was gone, replaced by something fragile and new. Miss Clara? Yes, sweetheart? When you marry Pa, can I call you Mama? Not to replace my real Mama, but just because... Her voice trailed off, uncertain. Because you want a Mama you can see and touch and talk to? Clara finished gently. Emmeline nodded, looking terrified of the answer. I would be honored, Clara said.
Whenever you're ready."
The wedding took place 3 days later, in the small church at the edge of Bitter Creek, with snow falling softly outside the windows. It was not the wedding Clara had once dreamed of, with flowers and music and a dress made of white silk. She wore her gray cotton, the same dress she'd worn on the train platform, and her only jewelry was Rachel's ring, already on her finger. But as she walked down the aisle toward Silas, who stood waiting with Emmeline and Eli on either side of him, she realized this was better than any dream. This was real. Mrs. Chen sat in the front pew, her severe face softened by something that might have been tears. Old Jedediah Hawkins, a rancher who'd known Silas's father, had agreed to serve as witness, despite the disapproval of half the town. And standing at the back of the church, her face twisted with fury, was Prudence Harwood. "This is a mockery," Prudence announced loudly as Clara reached the altar. "A sham marriage to circumvent legitimate concerns about moral fitness. I demand that Reverend Thompson refuse to perform this ceremony." The Reverend, a tired-looking man in his 60s, sighed heavily. "Mrs. Harwood, you have no legal standing to make such a demand." "I have moral standing. This woman arrived in town less than a week ago, under fraudulent circumstances. She has been living in sin with Mr. Beckett, corrupting his children." "I have been living at Mrs. Chen's boarding house," Clara said calmly, "and working at the ranch during daylight hours. There has been nothing improper about my conduct, and I'll thank you not to make accusations you can't support." "The whole town knows what's really going on here." "The whole town knows what you've told them." Silas's voice cut through the church like a blade. "And the whole town knows you've been trying to drive me off my land since Rachel died. First with your charity that came with strings attached, then with your whisper campaigns about my fitness as a father. Now with your railroad friends and their threats." Prudence's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Victor Crane, Pacific Western Railroad, came to my house with an offer to buy my land and veiled threats about what would happen if I refused." Silas took a step toward her. "He mentioned moral fitness, Prudence. Same words you've been using. Quite a coincidence." "I had nothing to do with that." "Didn't you?" Old Jed Hawkins stood slowly from his pew. "Because I've been asking around, Prudence. Seems the railroad's been buying up information about struggling homesteaders from someone in town. Someone who knows everyone's business. Someone who makes it her business to know." Prudence's composure cracked. "This is absurd. I've been trying to help this family." "You've been trying to control this family." Clara's voice was steady. "And when that didn't work, you tried to destroy it." "But it's not going to work, Mrs. Harwood. Silas and I are getting married today. His land is protected. His children are cared for. There's nothing left for you to manipulate." "You think this marriage protects you?" Prudence laughed bitterly. "Crane won't stop just because you've made things legal. The railroad always gets what it wants." "Then they'll have to go through all of us." Mrs. Chen stood now too. "And the rest of the town who's tired of watching you use people's pain for your own purposes." One by one, other people in the church began to stand. Not many, just a handful, but enough. People who'd been watching silently, who'd heard the whispers and seen through them, who'd been waiting for someone to speak first. Prudence looked around at the faces arrayed against her, and for the first time, her certainty wavered. "You'll regret this," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "All of you." She turned and swept out of the church, the door slamming behind her. In the silence that followed, Eli tugged on Clara's skirt. "Does this mean the mean lady is gone?" "For now, sweetheart." "Good. She makes my tummy hurt." Despite everything, Clara laughed. "Mine too." Reverend Thompson cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed with the ceremony? I believe we've had quite enough interruptions for one wedding." Silas reached for Clara's hand. "Yes," he said. "Let's get married." The vows were simple, traditional, spoken in the quiet church with snow falling outside and the ghosts of doubt finally laid to rest. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Silas looked at Clara with something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, the willingness to try. He leaned in and kissed her softly, briefly, a seal on the promise they'd made. And Emmeline, watching from beside them, slipped her hand into Clara's and squeezed tight. The ride back to the ranch felt different this time. Clara sat beside her husband, her hand resting on his arm, watching the snow-covered landscape pass by. In the back of the wagon, Emmeline and Eli were arguing about who got to sit closer to their new mother. "We did it," Silas said quietly. "We actually did it." "Did you doubt we would?" "I doubted everything. Still do, mostly." He glanced at her. "But less than I did a week ago." "That's progress." "Is it enough?" Clara considered the question. "It's a start. That's all we need right now. A start." When they reached the ranch, Silas lifted her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome home, Mrs. Beckett." The name felt strange and right all at once. "Thank you, Mr. Beckett." Emmeline pushed between them, impatient. "Can we have cake now? Mrs. Chen said there would be cake." "Mrs. Chen was right," Clara smiled. "She sent one back with us. Chocolate, I believe." The children ran inside, their excitement temporarily overwhelming any remaining uncertainty, and Clara and Silas stood alone on the porch. "Clara," Silas's voice was rough. "I meant what I said, every word of those vows. I'm going to try, every day, to be the husband you deserve." "I know." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw beneath her fingers. "And I'm going to try too, to be patient, to let you open that door at your own pace." He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. "It might take time. I might fail. I might disappoint you." "Probably. I'll probably disappoint you too," Clara smiled. "That's what marriage is. Two imperfect people trying their best and forgiving each other when their best isn't good enough." Something in his expression softened. Rachel used to say something similar. Then she was a wise woman, and I'm honored to continue what she started. Silas pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, "for staying, for fighting, for choosing us." "Thank you for letting me." They stood there on the porch, holding each other while the snow fell around them. Two wounded people beginning the slow work of healing together. Inside, they could hear the children laughing, demanding cake, being gloriously, wonderfully normal. And somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, reminder of the threat that still loomed, the battle that wasn't over. But for this moment, in this place, with this strange, beautiful family she'd somehow stumbled into, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten was possible. She felt home. The days following the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful, but Clara knew better than to trust it. Victor Crane's deadline loomed like a storm on the horizon, and Prudence Harwood's silence was more unsettling than her accusations had ever been. 3 days after the wedding, the first blow came. Silas returned from town with a face like thunder and the letter crumpled in his fist. "What is it?" Clara asked, wiping her hands on her apron as he stormed into the kitchen. "Notice from the land office. They're claiming I owe back taxes on the property. $500, due within 30 days, or the land reverts to territorial control. Clara's blood ran cold.
That's impossible. You've paid everything on time.
I know I have. I've got receipts for every payment going back 7 years. Silas threw the letter on the table. But according to this, their records showed discrepancies, missing payments, fees that were never processed. Crane. Has to be. He said they'd find other avenues if I didn't sell. Silas ran his hands through his hair. $500.
I don't have that kind of money. Nobody does. Clara picked up the letter, reading it carefully. It says you can contest the claim, file an appeal with the territorial government, which takes months. Months we don't have. Silas sank into a chair, defeat written in every line of his body. They've got us, Clara. One way or another, they're going to take this land. No. Clara's voice was sharp. No, they're not. Silas looked up at her, confusion mixing with despair. How? How do we fight this? We don't have money for lawyers. We don't have connections in the territorial government. We don't have anything except this ranch and each other. Then that's what we use. Clara sat down across from him, her mind racing. Think, Silas. Who in this town has reason to want Crane stopped? Who else has he threatened? I don't know. I've been so focused on my own problems. Then we find out. We talk to people. We ask questions. Clara leaned forward. Crane isn't just coming after you. The railroad is buying up land all through the territory. That means other homesteaders are facing the same pressure, the same threats, the same fabricated debts. Something flickered in Silas's eyes. Old Jed Hawkins. He mentioned something at the wedding about the railroad buying information. Then we start with him. What does he know? Who else has Prudence been feeding information about? Silas stared at her for a long moment. You really think we can fight this? I think we have to try. And I think we're stronger together than any of us are alone. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. You're not facing this by yourself anymore, Silas. Whatever happens, we face it together. He squeezed her hand, and some of the despair left his face. Together, he repeated. The next morning, they left the children with Mrs. Chen and rode out to Jed Hawkins's place, a small homestead 10 miles west of town. Jed met them on his porch, coffee in hand, his weathered face creased with concern. Figured you'd be coming, he said. Heard about the tax notice. Same thing happened to the Muellers last month, and the Petersons before them. What happened to them? Sold out. Couldn't fight it, couldn't afford to contest it. Railroad bought their land for a fraction of what it was worth. Jed spat into the snow. Crane's been working his way through the valley, picking off homesteaders one by one. How is he doing it? Clara asked. How is he falsifying records? Got someone inside the land office. Has to be. The records get changed, payments disappear. Suddenly you owe money you've already paid. Jed shook his head. Nobody can prove anything because the records are the records. Your word against their paperwork. But if multiple people are affected, if we can show a pattern, you'd need those people to come forward. And most of them are too scared or too beaten down to fight. Silas leaned forward. What about you, Jed? Has Crane come after you? Not yet. My place isn't in the railroad's path. The old man's eyes narrowed. But I've been watching, listening, keeping track of what's happening to my neighbors. Would you be willing to share what you know? Jed studied them for a long moment. Your pa was a good man, Silas. Stood by me when nobody else would. I reckon I owe his memory some loyalty. He set down his coffee cup. Come inside. I've got some things to show you. What Jed had to show them was a ledger, pages and pages of notes documenting every suspicious land sale, every fabricated debt, every homesteader who'd been forced out over the past 2 years. 12 families, Jed said quietly.
12 families pushed off their land by tactics just like what's happening to you. Clara flipped through the pages, her heart pounding. This is evidence, real evidence of a pattern. Evidence that nobody's been willing to do anything with. I tried taking it to the sheriff. He told me to mind my own business. Jed's voice was bitter. Railroads got money. Money buys silence. What about the territorial governor? Silas asked. Never met the man. Don't know anyone who has. Clara looked up from the ledger. I do. Both men turned to stare at her. My former employer in Boston, Mrs. Thornton. Before she died, she corresponded with half the politicians in the country, including Governor Patterson of Wyoming Territory. Clara's mind was racing. I helped her write those letters. I know his address. I know his interests. I know how to get his attention. You think you can reach the governor? I think I can try. And I think if we can get this evidence in front of someone with actual power, someone Crane hasn't bought, we might have a chance. Silas looked at her with something like wonder. You never stop surprising me. I told you I don't run. Clara closed the ledger. I fight. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Clara wrote letter after letter to Governor Patterson, detailing the railroad's tactics and including copies of Jed's documentation. Silas rode from homestead to homestead, talking to families who'd been victimized, convincing them to add their voices to the complaint. Not everyone agreed to help. Some were too scared. Some had already moved away. But enough remained. Enough people who were angry and desperate and willing to fight back. Mrs. Chen organized the women of the town, gathering signatures on a petition demanding an investigation into the land office. Even some of Prudence Harwood's former allies began to waver as the evidence mounted. And through it all, Emmeline and Eli watched their new family transform from victims into warriors. Mama, Emmeline said one evening as Clara was preparing dinner. The words still sent a thrill through Clara every time she heard it. Are we going to lose the ranch? Clara knelt down to look her daughter in the eye. I don't know, sweetheart, but I know we're doing everything we can to keep it. And I know that whatever happens, we'll face it together, as a family. That man, Mr. Crane, he's the one trying to take our home? He works for people who want our land for their railroad. He doesn't care about us or what we lose. Emmeline's jaw set in a line that reminded Clara strongly of Silas. That's not right. No, it's not. Then we have to stop him. We're trying, Emmy. We're trying very hard. The girl was quiet for a moment. I could write another letter, she said finally. I'm good at writing letters. That's how I got you to come here. Clara laughed despite herself. That's true. You're very persuasive. She pulled Emmeline into a hug. But I think this time, we need to let the adults handle the letter writing. You've done your part. More than your part. I just want to help. You already have. More than you know. The response from Governor Patterson came 3 weeks after Clara's first letter, delivered by a rider who looked like he'd traveled hard and fast to reach them. Mrs. Beckett? The rider held out an envelope sealed with the territorial seal. Message from the governor's office. I'm to wait for a reply. Clara's hand shook as she opened the letter. Dear Mrs. Beckett, she read, your correspondence has reached me at a most opportune time. I have been receiving troubling reports about the Pacific Western Railroad's land acquisition practices for some months now, but have lacked sufficient evidence to take action. The documentation you have provided, along with the testimonies of the affected homesteaders, gives me what I need to launch a formal investigation. I am dispatching a special investigator to Bitter Creek immediately. Please inform the sheriff and the land office that their records will be subject to review. Additionally, I am issuing a temporary stay on all pending land seizures in the territory until the investigation is complete. Your husband's property is protected for now. Thank you for your courage in bringing this matter to my attention. The territory of Wyoming owes you a debt of gratitude. Yours sincerely, John Patterson, Governor. Clara read the letter twice before she could believe it. Then she ran outside, where Silas was mending fence near the barn, and threw herself into his arms. "We did it," she gasped. "The governor. He's sending an investigator. He's stopping the seizures. Silas, we did it!" Silas took the letter from her hands, his eyes scanning the words, and Clara watched disbelief transform into hope, transform into joy. "We did it," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Clara, you did it." "We all did. Everyone who spoke up, everyone who added their voice." She pulled back to look at him. "Your land is safe, Silas, at least for now." He cupped her face in his hands, and there were tears in his eyes, tears he wasn't trying to hide. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up, for fighting when I wanted to surrender, for being exactly what this family needed." And then he kissed her. Not the soft, brief kiss from their wedding day. This was deeper, longer, filled with everything he'd been holding back. Gratitude and relief, and something else. Something that felt like the beginning of love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "I think I'm starting to open that door," he said quietly. "The one I slammed shut 4 years ago. It's terrifying, but it feels like coming back to life." "Take your time," Clara whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." The investigation took 2 months, but when it was finished, the results were devastating for Victor Crane and everyone who'd conspired with him. Records had been falsified. Bribes had been paid. 12 families had been illegally driven from their land through fraud and intimidation. Crane was arrested. The land office clerk who'd helped him was fired and faced criminal charges. And Prudence Harwood, whose role as an informant was finally exposed, found herself shunned by the very community she'd tried so hard to control. The day the news reached Bitter Creek, there was something like a celebration in the streets. Families who'd lost their land were promised restitution. Homesteaders who'd been threatened could finally breathe easy. And at the Beckett Ranch, 4 people sat around the kitchen table eating dinner together. A real family dinner, with laughter and conversation, and the kind of warmth that had been missing from this house for far too long. "Pa," Eli said through a mouthful of mashed potatoes, "can Mama stay forever now, because the bad men are gone?" Silas looked at Clara across the table, and the love in his eyes was unmistakable now, no longer hidden, no longer afraid. "Yes, Eli," he said. "Mama's staying forever." "Good." The boy returned to his potatoes, the matter settled in his mind. Emmeline was quieter, but she reached under the table and squeezed Clara's hand. "I'm glad I wrote that letter," she whispered, "even though it was wrong, because it brought you to us." "I'm glad too, sweetheart, more than I can say." After dinner, after the children were in bed, Clara and Silas sat on the porch together, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. "Rachel would be proud of you," Clara said softly, "of how you fought for this land, for your children." "She would have liked you," Silas replied. "She would have loved watching you become part of this family." "I hope so. I think about her sometimes, about whether she approves of what we're building." Silas was quiet for a moment. "I went to her grave yesterday," he said. "First time since I took you there. I talked to her for a long time, told her about everything that's happened, about Crane and the investigation, about you." "What did you say about me?" "That I was wrong when I told you I couldn't promise to love you." Silas turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the truth of what he was about to say. "Because somewhere along the way, I started loving you anyway. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was when you stood up to Prudence at our wedding.
Maybe it was when you held Emmeline while she cried. Maybe it was before that, when you looked at me on the train platform and refused to run. Clara's heart was pounding. Silas. I love you, Clara. Not because you saved our ranch, or because you're good with the children, or because marrying you was practical. I love you because you're brave and kind and stubborn, and you make me want to be better than I've been. He took her hands in his. I love you because you make this house feel like a home again, because you make me feel like I'm alive again. Clara pulled him close, kissing him with all the hope and love she'd been holding back. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. I think I've loved you since you showed me Rachel's grave and let me see the real you, the wounded, grieving, wonderful man underneath all that stone. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd found something neither of them expected. Love born from practicality, family built from choice, home discovered in the most unlikely of places. Emmy's letter, Silas said finally. The one that brought you here. She wrote that she was looking for someone to help us, someone who'd want to stay. She had no idea what she was actually asking for. What was she asking for? A miracle, Silas smiled, and somehow, against all odds, she got one. 1 year later, on a warm spring morning, the Beckett family stood together at Rachel's grave. Silas held Eli on his hip. Emmeline clutched a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself. And Clara stood beside her husband, her hand resting gently on the swell of her belly where new life was growing. Mama Rachel, Emmeline said softly, placing the flowers at the base of the cross. I want you to know that we're okay now. Pa smiles again, and Eli's learning to read, and Mama Clara takes care of all of us. And there's going to be a new baby, a little brother or sister. She paused, her voice trembling. I still miss you every day, but I'm not sad all the time anymore. I hope that's okay. Silas knelt beside his daughter, wrapping an arm around her. It's more than okay, Emmy. It's what she would have wanted. Clara watched them, tears streaming down her face, and felt Rachel's presence like a blessing, a benediction on the family they'd become. Thank you, she whispered, too soft for anyone else to hear. For loving them first, for preparing the way, for trusting me to continue what you started. The wind stirred the wildflowers, gentle as a mother's touch, and Clara knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that Rachel had heard. They walked back to the ranch together, the four of them, soon to be 5. The house that had once been a mausoleum of grief now rang with laughter and light. The land that enemies had tried to steal now stretched green and promising under the spring sun. And the woman who'd stepped off a train into rejection had found something she'd stopped believing was possible. A family who chose her, a man who loved her, a home that would never let her go. The letter that started everything still hung on Emmeline's wall, framed now, a reminder that sometimes the biggest miracles begin with the smallest acts of desperate hope. And sometimes, when the light hit it just right, Clara could almost see the words that Emmeline had never written, but had meant with all her young heart. Please send us someone who'll stay. Someone had come, and she was never leaving. Because home isn't a place you find. It's a family you choose, a love you build, and a promise you keep, every single day for the rest of your life.